History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. This has to be one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's from the famous American author Mark Twain, and it really gets at the heart of some of these complex issues we're dealing with today in modern society with integration, assimilation, identity, and culture. Now, what could North Koreans in Japan, Turks in Germany, and Germanic barbarian groups in the late Roman Empire have in common? This was a question I struggled with for a long time. As a student of history, I wanted to kind of draw all of these different examples together and try to find, the continuous themes that remain the same despite national boundaries and thousands of years of history separating these different instances. So, as I was actually reading about the late Roman Empire, it really occurred to me that these different issues I was reading about are actually occurring today. To give you guys one really interesting example I wanted to share with you, from the times of Japan, they basically relate how third and fourth generation descendants of Koreans actually remain loyal to their heritage and actually choose to send their children to some of these 60 private schools that are aligned with North Korea, basically teaching the culture and history of North Korea. Many of these schools actually have portraits of the late North Korean dictators such as Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Now, what I found incredibly fascinating about this instance was the fact that in a modern liberal democratic society such as Japan, you had a lot of students who were actually being taught basically North Korean propaganda. I thought if they had such a wide access to all of this information and they're living in such a well-integrated and modern advanced society such as Japan, how could they be so strongly attached to this brutal regime in North Korea? It really became clear to me that we've seen these different cases play out before in history. The other example I wanted to bring to you guys, which is equally interesting, is a case from Germany that happened last year in Germany's third largest city, Cologne. So basically tens of thousands of second, third, and fourth generation Turkish Germans rallied in favor of the constitutional reforms that Erdogan wanted to enact. Many of these constitutional changes were actually completely contrary to modern German values, such as the reinstitution of the death penalty and various laws that would basically advance Islam in Turkey. What I found incredibly interesting about this rally was the fact that you saw how clearly tens of thousands of these German citizens were waving Turkish flags and obviously displayed very clear affiliation with Turkey. So there are obviously already very clear parallels between the example in Japan and that in Germany. So how does all of this tie into ancient history? Well, that was a question as a student of ancient history I wanted to uncover and present to you today. So as I was reading the book by J.F. Matthews, Western Aristocracies and the Imperial Court between 364 and 425, it became apparent to me we see these different cases playing out thousands of years ago. So the Gothic Germans residing within the confines of the late Roman Empire actually adopted a form of unorthodox Christianity that was an earlier variation called Arianism. Now, the reason why they did this was for two reasons. So first of all, they wanted to kind of have it both ways. They wanted to remain distinct as a people, which is why they chose this brand of Christianity, while also having a bit of commonality with their Roman neighbors. Now, we see this also in Japan. We have instances such as the famous actress Kiko, who actually adopted a Japanese name despite attending one of these Korean-orientated schools. But then we also see a lot of cases of famous filmmakers and prominent individuals who did attend these schools, but who have a very strongly favorable impression of North Korea. So we see different instances playing out here. We also see strong religious overtones in terms of the rally that took place in Germany, with even prayer breaks taking place. So a lot of these themes have actually run and played out throughout history, and we see strong correlation there. Now, the conclusion I want to leave you guys with is related to two pieces of vital information from ancient history. The first is given by Hydatius, a prominent Roman individual in the late Roman Empire. And he relates to us a very grim impression of what was taking place place back then. Things that we see happening now in certain instances, such as the infamous groping scandal that took place in Cologne, the same city in which this huge rally took place. Also, in the case of Japan, many instances have taken place with North Korean students being slashed with knives and being harassed on the train. These are all themes that are tied together. So Hydatius relates to us that the country was overrun with savage thoroughness, that the Vandals, a new barbarian tribe that had emerged from Germany and moved into the Roman Empire, had actually ravaged the countryside, assaulted towns, and taken many prisoners. Churches had been burned and entire populations had been enslaved. Members of the local aristocracy made rare appearances, often only to surrender themselves and to basically provide loot to these new barbarian warlords. Now, when studying history, it's very easy to think from a perspective of inevitability. The same applies to modern politics. We often think things are set in stone and that things are just the way they are. And that's one reason why we see a lot of pushback against globalism. Because a lot of people say that these things are inevitable and they must run a certain way. However, that's not always the case. One can look at these perspectives and take a lot of grim conclusions from them. Or, contrarily, a very idealistic impression, but come away with a completely different conclusion. So to juxtapose and contrast with that grim impression given by Hydatius, let's look at the wedding between Athalf, a prominent German noble, with Galla Placidia, a Roman noblewoman. The marriage, according to the sources, was a great success and fused these two cultures with one another and provided a stunning example of the kind of harmonious relation that did actually exist between these different barbarian groups who sort of added their own elements of their culture to the pre-existing Roman fabric. Now, it's a point of irony actually that a lot of the presents that were given in this wedding were actually looted from Rome itself. But I don't think that this should take away from the success of this wedding. Now, in conclusion, I think that we can actually learn a lot from history. And I think that there are, these continuous, themes that are constantly playing out. And I think a lot of people in modern society kind of lose sight of that fact. We kind of think that, that past is behind us and that there's nothing that can really be learned from history because it's so different. Well, I think that that's actually not the case. I think we can actually learn a lot from history and that a lot of these issues that we're seeing playing out have happened before. So if you like this video, please consider subscribing, hit the like button, and I hope you learned something today. Thank you.